What is up, guys? My name is Rahul Reddy, and today we're going to be doing a early tier list for the Temporal Forces set. Before I jump into this, you guys will see my honest opinions from what happened over in the Champions League in Fukuoka. Just a little bit of Pokemon that I got to see play, not a ton of the new format. Obviously, the play wasn't amazing across the board, or it wasn't even that good, maybe, but we got to see the new decks in action to some degree. So before I jump into my predictions, I want you guys to put what decks you think are going to be in tier 0 or don't play this tier. What'll be the biggest surprise for you? What decks you're most excited to play in the comments below. So that's my question of the day for you guys. And that being said, let's jump into it. My name is Rahul. Like I said again, if you like this kind of content, like and subscribe. Let's do some stuff. So Dialga Metang, I didn't see a single time, but I feel like it's got to have some legs to stand on, right? Like Metang is a really good card. You get to see 4 cards, find any energy accelerated. Timeless is a pretty good attack, and Timeless plus Devo in a lot of situations can help Dialga beat stuff like Zard, etc. But the question is, can your first attack reliably do enough damage to one-shot other things in the format without going down yourself? Obviously, things that play fire typing are low in the format, but decks like Gardevoir, single prize attackers could two-shot you reliably, maybe even one-shot you down the road. Roaring Moon might just be able to trade efficiently into you across the board. Iron Hands can just bring up the Metangs and take them out. Goldengo can one-shot you. Arctina can one-shot you. There's a lot of one-shot decks in the format, so I think that Dialga falls into tier 3. I wouldn't say don't play this because it seems kind of fun, but yeah. Iron Valiant Entei, I think, goes into the don't play this tier just because I know it's really, really good this format. And it's been popping off, doing quite well in the hands of Tyler Matthews. But I do think in the next format, everything gets a little bit bigger. So it gets a little bit tougher to take one-shots, and you lose 4 copies of Escape Rope, which is actually a much bigger loss than I think people realize. Sure, there's no path to the peak around anymore, but losing card like Escape Rope, so you can't pivot as easily, makes life a little bit tougher, makes you only have Switch and Switch Cart and Prime Catcher potentially, which if you squawk away a couple of those on turn 1 or have to waste them, now your damage is a little bit more limited than it was prior. So I think this deck just falls into the category of you lost one of the best cards for you that was doing quite well. Arceus Giratina is going to go into tier 1 for me. I think Arceus Giratina proved itself to be one of the better decks in this format. Arceus has not gone anywhere. It's still quite good if it goes first, gets the 180 turn 2 into powering up an attacker, setting up a board. Not many things can one-shot an Arceus V-Star going second. On turn 2, like you have Ancient Box stuff that can 2-shot it, sure. Iron Hand stuff that can 2-shot it, sure. Qian Pao can one-shot it, Roaring Moon can one-shot it, Goldengo can one-shot it, but besides those decks, everything else is quite poor into Arceus. And then you have Giratina, which cleans up a lot of things to the format for 280 damage, and then you have Max Belt as well if you want to play that version. You can play whatever ace spec you want, honestly, because Arceus is pretty versatile in how you want to play the deck. But you have Giratina with Max Belt, which one-shots Charizard. And then you have Iron Leaves as well to take another one-shot onto Charizard. So I think this deck is really good, and I think it should be respected as such. I think Great Tusk Mill, I'm assuming this is the Mill version. Great Tusk Mill, I think, falls into tier 2. I don't think Mill is necessarily bad. I saw it do quite well over the weekend, win quite a few games on stream, and I think Mill is very, very real. But I think the problem is that it's going to teeter at the bottom of tier 1 and the upper echelons of tier 2 until, if decks are more prepared for it, if decks play, small answers to it, if players play better in the Mill, the more known Mill is as a concept, players will learn how to play against it better, and therefore Mill's viability will go down. Some decks sure can't deal with it whatsoever, but I think that number is much more limited in this format because decks like Arceus, which can just attach attack, Future Hands can just attach attack, Gardevoir can attach attack. A lot of decks can just attach attack every turn after turn, putting you in a pretty rough position where you can't really abuse those counter catchers the way you want to. And if you're milling 4 every single turn, sometimes you're not going to be able to find exactly what you need, especially if you're getting Iono'd to the ground or things are getting rough for you. I think Future Box falls into tier 2 as well. I think this is going to be the Iron Hands version, I assume, if there's no Iron Hands on here. Yeah. So I think Future Box falls into this category just because it is really strong, but I think you have a couple of negative matchups into the tier 1 decks. I think your Arceus matchup is a little bit tougher than you'd like. However, your Lugia matchup is really probably good. And your entire deck depends on keeping your batons into play. So if the batons don't get to stick around, I think that there's that's your Achilles heel. The deck has that one Achilles heel of, okay, my baton got knocked out, my baton got vacuumed, my Iron Hands got knocked out, I got Iono to 4. What do I do from here? Do I just go back up and attack with Miraidon again? presumably Miraidon's already been taken out, one of them. So now I'm down 3 prize cards. I've only taken maybe 3 prize cards in return. And if a Miraidon goes down now, I'm left with having to take 3 prize cards to end the game. But now my opponent has a free knockout into my Iron Hands to end the game. And I can maybe take 2 at most. So I think sometimes that's a little bit of a scary situation. I think Lost Box falls into tier 3, unfortunately. Because losing Rope is a little bit bigger than people expect, I think. And now you're in a position where you don't have cards like Clara and Raihan. If you're playing Sablezard and things of that nature, I think that the deck is just a little bit clunkier than it used to be. And I just don't personally like Lost Box as a deck. So maybe you can find success with it, but you have to play cards like Moon Hands, spread thin across the board with your attackers and your strategy, and I don't like that at all. I think Giratina falls into tier 3 as well, because even though Giratina is very powerful as an attacker, I think losing the combination Path Roxanne play, mainly losing Path, I think hurts quite a bit for the deck. I think having Path was one of the best assets for the deck while it existed, and losing Path is like kind of dooming for the deck because you're always one turn behind in a lot of situations, and I just don't like that. I think Gardevoir goes into tier 3 as well, just because Gardevoir is one of those decks where I think you lose Zacian, you lose Level Ball, you lose Fog Crystal. Now you have to play cards like Vessel, Capture Garoma potentially. You have to fill those gaps with something, and Fog Crystal and Level Ball were just so absolutely broken. No Mirage Step also means that now slow starts can be punished or exploited a lot easier. You do have Poffins, which find you Ralts at any stage in the game, so maybe you can come back and make a comeback at some point. But you don't have Shining Arcana Gardevoir anymore either, so you're left with attackers that are just Screamtail or other small Psychic type guys like Mimikyu, whatever, and I don't think that's enough to carry you through the format, especially when some of the top decks can just punish you by doing more damage than they need to and one-shot you. Gardevoir Raging Bolt, I think, is tier 3 as well. I haven't tried this deck yet, actually, or I didn't see it on stream either, so I can't actually speak entirely for it, but I think that this deck is one of the few decks that has a ton of pressure and puts a lot of big attackers into play. I assume you also have Screamtail and small attackers in the back, as well as using Raging Bolt. Basically, you power up your Raging Bolt manually with 2 attachments, but then you have Gardevoir, which accelerates as much as you want to your board, so you can accelerate energy and then Raging Bolt the energy away, so you can do a ton of damage, effectively infinite every single turn. But is it worth, and can you actually chain that? Charizard Pidgeot is the first tier 0 deck, I think, in my opinion, in the format. I think Charizard is even more powerful now that Path to the Peak is no longer in the format. Max Belt is an addition to Charizard as well to deal with decks like Chien-Pao in the early game, a Future Box in the early game, taking that 230, or you can hit for 230 now much easier. Pidgeot is still around. You don't really lose anything besides Celebrations Mew, which was actually very, very good for the deck, but now you can play less cards like Vacuum and Stadiums even, because you don't have to worry about Path to the Peak, so you have more room for better cards in Charizard, and when you get access to better cards, well, the world is your oyster, basically. Like, you have so much more space than you did before. And Charizard Bibarel also, I think, falls into S tier, or tier 0 in my opinion, because it follows the same exact logic of there's no real bad guys to bully it anymore. Evo is still a pretty strong tool. You can get the board set up. You have Cryptomaniac's Deciphering coming out, which lets you put 2 cards on top. So you can always combo that with Bibarel. Or you can even just play heavier counter catchers and play into like Arvins a little bit more. You don't have a Pidgeot on the bench that's going to get gusted, so your opponents can't go 2-2-2. You can still access a lot of the same resources that Pidgeot can. And I think it's just as powerful because Charizard is very powerful. I think Pao goes into tier 1 because Chien-Pao loses, again, no path to inhibit its unlimited ability usage, but you do have a much more difficult time finding your Greninja and Pao on turn 1 because you don't have access to anything besides Nest Ball and potentially Ultra Ball to find those pieces because there's no VIP pass anymore. But that being said, you can still find those pieces on turn 1, get the ball rolling, have a pretty big hand size, get set up, and you have no path inhibiting you from just rolling through a matchup if you need to. Raging Bolt, I think, is tier 3. I think Raging Bolt is going to struggle with some of the better decks. Yes, you have that one-shot potential, but if they just don't walk into Sandy Shock's territory as easily or take the first knockout before you take the first knockout, which is difficult for you to take the first knockout because you need like Raging Bolt, Sada, and Shocks like all at once type of thing, you might just fall behind too far and then the game just catapults into a position that you can't recover from because chaining one-shots in the end game is not very easy, and you can't do that against Zard. You're going to have trouble doing that against Arceus, and you're going to have trouble, like, not as much against Power maybe, but like 3 of the top decks that I have listed out here, I think, yeah, you're going to have trouble doing it too. Moon is next. I think Moon goes into tier 2 because it's still the same deck it is in this format. It doesn't lose anything. You, I guess, lose Celebrations if you played that, but you have everything like Squawk, Dark Patch, all those cool cards, those pieces. You have still the aggro deck you are, but you're I think like you are going to lose to one prize decks now, and I think Zard, if they play the max belt or whatever, has a better chance of just barreling through you. And the other Charmander is going to be much more played because there's no reason to discard stadiums anymore, so you don't need to play the 70 HP Charmander. And Lost Box should be on the decline as well. So I think Roaring Moon is going to struggle against that. And if Fluttermanes become more popular or Klefkis become more popular in turn, I think this deck can struggle a little bit more against that. I think Goldango is tier 2. I haven't seen any reason to put it in a tier 1 just yet. We didn't see any Dango on stream this past weekend, but in concept, the deck is really, really good. You have a good Charizard matchup. I feel like you should have a good Arceus matchup if you can get the turn 2 pop-off off. Maybe you don't get the Palkia knockout, but if you go first, you could probably get the turn 2 Palkia knockout with Subspace Swell. You should be fine at a POW, but the problem is you're trading 2 for 2 in every matchup. So single prize matchups get a little bit dicey, especially in the late game when they have the potential to one-shot. I think Snorlax Stall falls into tier 1 because Stall has gotten a lot of new pieces. Namely, a lot of decks have lost pieces to deal with getting around a block. So now you're in a position where Stall decks can be a little bit more aggressive. You have the Chi Yu, the Hero's Cape, making your guy a little bit bigger. And I think that's just invaluable across the board. I think Ancient Box is tier 2, but it's going to be like the upper echelon of tier 2 because I think that you have the ability and flexibility to play whatever you want in the deck. And I think it can basically thrive with the fact that you have multiple attackers like Koraidon, Great Tusk, Fluttermane in the early game to set up, and then late game you have Roaring Moons. Mid to late game you have Roaring Moons to basically just clean up everything, because at some point you're going to start hitting for like 210, 220 pretty reliably with the tools, the vessels, the Pokemon, everything hitting the discard at some point. You're going to be hitting for a ton of damage, and in that position it's really hard to like lose if you're a one prize deck. So it's like Night March mixed with a little bit of everything, like a Night March toolbox, which I really, really like the concept of. Of course, you do have to chain supporters like Sada in the early game, and Greninja is the crux of your strategy. So if Greninja is prized, the game gets hard, etc. So there's a little bit of flaw to it. I think Lugia Chinchino falls into tier 1. I think Lugia is one of the better decks, probably one of the few decks I would consider putting in a tier 0 as well. Obviously, it just won the Champions League, so it is one of the best decks out there. It is very, very powerful. Chinchino can answer pretty much every deck in the format. And then you have big guys and small guys basically answering everything. Snorlax deals with Lost Box stuff. You have Jet Energies to beat stuff like Snorlax Stall potentially with Stadiums. It's just a really good deck in general. I think it absolutely throttles Arceus. I think you have a good matchup into POW and Snorlax. And I think it's a 50-50 into the Zard deck, so which makes all the qualities of a Lugia deck being put up here. However, you have some bad matchups, obviously. Like Turbo Iron Hands is not very good for you. And I think that's probably one of the biggest ones for everyone. I just wouldn't play Miraidon anymore. I think Miraidon's dead. I just don't think it's a good deck. I think it loses too much in general, and I just don't like the idea of how it plays anymore. I think Banette control stuff goes into tier 3. I haven't really tried Banette control stuff just yet, but I think there is merit to it somewhere. If you can lock your opponents out long enough. I don't know if you can lock your opponents out long enough to win the game, but I think Banette could, like Banette or Bronzong or whatever, could do well in this attacker deck. Torterra goes into the don't play tier, but I do think Torterra is like a fun deck or a funny looking deck. So there is hope in my heart that Torterra will work and someone will break it. Hopefully I'll have a video on the channel of early gameplay for Torterra at some point. So here is my tier list. I hope you guys either agree or disagree with it. Tier 0 is my BDIFs for sure. Tier 1 is these are going to be public enemy number 1s, decks to deal with. Like if I'm going to a tournament, these are the decks I'm going to be targeting down. Tier 2 is these are going to be my radar, but I don't expect too many of these. And then tier 3 is like I just hope I don't hit one of these because they're not real. These are just fake decks in my opinion. And then don't play this category is like, yeah, I might take this to a cup, but that's the best you're getting out of me. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the content. Please like and subscribe. Peace out, everybody.